They called him the King of New York, a man who could silence a room just by walking into it. But the loudest thing in Dominic Moretti's life was the silence of his daughter. Everyone was terrified of him, so they treated her like a ghost, invisible, ignored, avoided. I was just a substitute teacher with a mountain of debt and nothing to lose. I didn't see a mafia princess. I saw a lonely little girl. I didn't know that lifting my hands to sign a single word, friend, would put a target on my back, start a war between the 5 families, and force me to fall in love with the devil himself. This isn't a fairy tale. This is how I survived the Moretti family. The charity gala at the Pierre Hotel smelled of old money, heavy perfume, and fear. Sarah Jenkins adjusted the strap of her borrowed black dress, feeling entirely out of place. She wasn't here because she had thousands of dollars to donate to the NYPD Fallen Heroes Fund. She was here because the private school where she worked as a junior inclusion specialist had made attendance mandatory for staff to mingle with potential donors. At 26, Sarah was drowning in student loans and the medical bills for her younger brother, Toby, who was battling early-onset renal failure. She scanned the room, looking for a tray of champagne to calm her nerves. But the room's atmosphere shifted instantly. The ambient chatter died down. The air grew thin. The double doors swung open, and he walked in. Dominic Moretti. Even in the dim light of the chandeliers, he was terrifyingly handsome. He wore a tuxedo that fit his broad shoulders like armor. His dark hair swept back, revealing a face carved from granite. His eyes were the color of cold espresso, scanning the room not with interest, but with a predator's assessment. He was the head of the Moretti crime family, a man whose name was whispered in fear across 3 boroughs. But Sarah's eyes didn't linger on him. They went to the small hand clutching his tuxedo jacket. Beside him was a girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old. She wore a pristine white dress that made her look like a porcelain doll. Her dark curls were tied back with a ribbon. She looked terrified. As Dominic moved through the crowd, people parted like the Red Sea. They nodded respectfully at him, murmured, "Mr. Moretti," and quickly looked away. But the tragedy was in how they treated the girl. They looked through her. When Dominic stopped to shake hands with a trembling city councilman, the girl looked up at a woman standing nearby, a socialite dripping in diamonds. The girl offered a small, hesitant wave. The woman saw it. She froze, looked at Dominic to see if he was watching, and when she realized he was occupied, she simply turned her back on the child. Sarah felt a flare of anger, hot enough to burn her throat. They're scared of the father, so they shun the child. The girl, Bella, shrank in on herself. She looked down at her patent leather shoes, her small fingers twitching against her side. To anyone else, it looked like fidgeting. To Sarah, fluent in American Sign Language ASL, due to her own late grandmother's deafness, it was a scream. The girl was finger-spelling against her leg, Lonely, Home, Please. Sarah didn't think. She didn't calculate the risk of approaching the most dangerous man in the city. She just saw a student in distress. Sarah walked past the invisible barrier the other guests had created. She stopped 3 feet in front of Dominic Moretti. His security detail, 2 mountains of men named Luca and Matteo, stepped forward instantly, hands going inside their jackets. Dominic raised a hand, stopping them. He looked at Sarah with a boredom that was more insulting than anger. "Can I help you?" His voice was a deep baritone, smooth but laced with gravel. Sarah ignored him. She dropped to one knee, bringing herself to eye level with the little girl. The room went silent. You could hear a pin drop. Nobody approached the Moretti child. Sarah smiled, a genuine, warm smile, and raised her hands. "Hi." She signed. "I like your dress. It looks like a cloud." Bella's eyes went wide. She froze, her breath hitching. She looked up at her father, then back at Sarah. Slowly, trembling, she raised her hands. "You, speak." Hand Bella signed, her movements slightly clumsy but readable. "Yes." Sarah signed back, keeping her movements fluid and slow. "My name is Sarah. What is your name?" "Bella." The girl signed, a massive, radiant smile breaking across her face for the first time that night. "I am Bella." For a solid minute. The gala didn't exist. The mob boss didn't exist. It was just Sarah and Bella discussing the boring music and the gross appetizers in silent, flying hand shapes. Then, a shadow fell over them. Sarah looked up. Dominic Moretti was staring down at her. The boredom was gone from his eyes. In its place was something intense, calculating, and unreadable. He looked at his daughter, who was glowing, and then at the woman kneeling on the expensive carpet. "You sign," Dominic said. It wasn't a question. Sarah stood up, smoothing her dress, suddenly realizing she was standing in the kill zone of a man who allegedly dissolved his enemies in lie. "Ah, yes. I'm an inclusion teacher." I noticed Bella was speaking against her leg. Dominic's jaw tightened. "She hasn't spoken a word since her mother died 2 years ago. Doctors say it's psychological. She hears fine. She just won't speak." "She has plenty to say," Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly but her chin held high. "She just needs someone to listen to the language she's choosing." Dominic stepped closer, the scent of sandalwood, expensive scotch, and something metallic filled Sarah's nose. He was too big, too close. "What is your name?" Sarah Jenkins. Sarah Jenkins. He tested the name on his tongue. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a black card with nothing on it but a phone number embossed in gold. "You will call this number tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Do not be late." "I have a job," Sarah stammered. Dominic leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper that sent a shiver down her spine. "I didn't ask if you were employed. Ms. Jenkins, I told you to call." He took Bella's hand. For the first time, Bella didn't look like she was being dragged away. She looked back at Sarah and signed one last word, "friend." Sarah stood frozen in the middle of the ballroom as the Morettis left. She didn't know it yet, but she had just signed a contract with the devil. The address Sarah was given led her to the outskirts of the city, where the urban sprawl of New York gave way to the gated, wooded estates of Long Island's Gold Coast. The Uber driver refused to drive up the private road. "This is Moretti land. Lady, I ain't going past the gate. You walk from here." Sarah was left standing in the morning mist, staring at a wrought iron gate that looked like it belonged to a Gothic cathedral. She buzzed the intercom. "Jenkins," she said. The gates groaned open without a reply. The walk up the driveway took 10 minutes. The house, no. The fortress was a sprawling modern mansion of glass and dark stone, perched on a cliff overlooking the grey Atlantic Ocean. There were cameras everywhere. As she reached the massive front door, it was opened by Luca, the head of security she had seen the night before. He patted her down, thoroughly. He checked her purse, her phone, even the lining of her coat. "Clean," Luca grunted into his earpiece. "Boss is in the library." Sarah was led through hallways that felt like a museum, marble floors, Renaissance paintings that Sarah was pretty sure were supposed to be in the Louvre, and an oppressive silence. There were no family photos, no toys, no signs of life. Luca opened a set of mahogany doors. In, the library was 2 stories high, filled with thousands of books. Dominic Moretti sat behind a desk the size of a small car, reading a file. He didn't look up as she entered. "Sit," he commanded. Sarah sat in the leather chair opposite him. She gripped her purse tightly. "Mr. Moretti, Sarah Elizabeth Jenkins," he interrupted, reading from the file. "Born in Queens, father deceased, mother in Florida. You teach at St. Jude's Academy. You're currently $32,000 in debt from student loans. But the interesting part..." He finally looked up, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "Is your brother, Toby Jenkins, 22 years old. Renal failure. On the transplant list, but way down at the bottom. His medical bills are currently sent to a collection agency that, let's just say, my associates are familiar with." Sarah's blood ran cold. "How do you know that?" Dominic closed the file. "I know everything. Sarah, it's how I stay alive, and it's how I keep my daughter alive." He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the crashing waves. "Bella has gone through 6 tutors in 6 months. They fear me, so they fear her. They treat her like she's broken. Last night, for the first time in 2 years, I saw her smile because of you." He turned back to her. "I want to hire you. Private governess. You live here. You teach her standard curriculum, but primarily, you teach her to communicate. You teach me to communicate with her." "I can't just leave my life," Sarah said, though her resolve was weakening. "I will pay off your student loans today," Dominic said flatly. "I will pay off your brother's medical debt, and I will have him move to the top of the private donor list at Mount Sinai. He'll have a new kidney by the end of the month." Sarah gasped. The air left her lungs. You can't just do that." "I can do anything. Sarah, that is the privilege of being me." He leaned against the desk, crossing his arms. The fabric of his shirt strained against his biceps. "But there are rules. Rule 1. What happens in this house stays in this house. You see nothing. You hear nothing. Rule 2. You do not leave the estate without an escort. Rule 3. You never, ever lie to me." He walked around the desk until he was standing right in front of her. He placed a hand on the armrest of her chair, boxing her in. "If you accept, your brother lives a long, healthy life. If you decline, you walk out that door, and we never speak again, and Toby stays on the waiting list." It was manipulation. It was coercion. It was a deal with the devil. But then Sarah thought of Toby, hooked up to dialysis machines, his skin grey and waxy, and she thought of Bella, signing lonely against her leg in a room full of people. Sarah looked up into the predator's eyes. "When do I start?" Dominic's mouth quirked into the faintest ghost of a smile. "You already have. Luca will show you to your room. Dinner is at 7. Do not be late." As Sarah walked out of the library, her legs shaking, she realized the silence of the house wasn't just peaceful. It was heavy. It was the silence of secrets. She was shown to her room, a suite larger than her entire apartment. On the bed was a brand new phone and a tablet. Her old phone was gone. She went to the window and looked down into the garden. She saw Bella sitting on a stone bench, staring at a dead rosebush. Sarah took a deep breath. She wasn't doing this for Dominic. She was doing this for Toby, and for Bella. She went downstairs, bypassing the security guards who watched her like hawks, and walked out into the garden. Bella didn't look up until Sarah's shadow fell over her. When she saw Sarah, Bella's face lit up. She jumped off the bench. "You came back," Bella signed rapidly. "I'm staying," Sarah signed back. "We are going to have a lot of fun." "Father is scary," Bella signed, glancing at the window where Dominic was undoubtedly watching. "He hurts people." Sarah knelt down, taking Bella's small hands in hers. "He loves you." "Bella, he's just loud. We will teach him to be quiet," from the library window above. Dominic Moretti watched the woman in the garden, holding his daughter's hands. He took a sip of whiskey. He had brought an outsider into the inner sanctum. It was a tactical error, a weakness. But watching Bella sign with a speed and joy he'd never seen before, Dominic knew he would kill anyone who tried to take Sarah Jenkins away. The phone on his desk buzzed. It was a secure line. "Yeah," Dominic answered, his eyes never leaving Sarah. "Boss." It was Sal Russo, the head of the rival Russo family. "I hear you got a new house guest. Pretty thing. Be a shame if she got caught in the crossfire." Dominic's grip on the glass tightened until it shattered, whiskey and blood dripping onto the carpet. "You touch her, Sal, and I won't just kill you," Dominic whispered. "I'll erase your entire bloodline." He hung up. The war had just arrived at his doorstep, and Sarah was standing right in the center of it. The first week at the Moretti estate passed in a blur of luxury and high-tension anxiety. Sarah settled into a routine that was both comforting and terrifying. Mornings were for lessons. They turned the sunroom into a classroom. Bella was brilliant, sharp as a tack, and hungry for knowledge, but she was woefully behind in social development. Sarah taught her history and math, but the real lessons were in ASL. "Emotion," Sarah signed, placing her hand over her heart and moving it upward. "You have to show it on your face, Bella. Sign language is 50% hands, 50% face." Bella giggled, contorting her face into an exaggerated frown. Like Papa when he is mad, Sarah laughed. Exactly like Papa. Dominic was a ghost in his own house. Sarah would see him leaving early in the morning in a cavalcade of black SUVs and returning late at night, smelling of cigar smoke and exhaustion. But he was always there for dinner. Dinner was a formal affair, a long table, enough to seat 20, with Dominic at one end, Bella at the other, and Sarah placed in the middle. The silence used to be suffocating, but Sarah began to chip away at it. "Bella learned the sign for hippopotamus today," Sarah announced one Tuesday evening, breaking the silence over the clinking of silverware. Dominic paused, his fork hovering over his steak. He looked at Bella. Bella hesitated, then raised her hands, forming the Y shapes and bringing them together like a gaping mouth. Dominic watched, fascinated. "Hippopotamus," he repeated. He looked at Sarah. "Show me." Sarah blinked. "You want to learn? I want to speak to my daughter," Dominic said, his voice void of the usual command, replaced by a rare vulnerability. So, the dinner table became a classroom. The most feared mob boss in New York sat there, struggling to manipulate his large, calloused fingers, fingers that had pulled triggers and broken bones into the delicate shapes of butterfly. School. And love. One rainy night. 3 weeks in. Sarah was in the library late, looking for a book on Roman history for Bella. She was wearing only her silk pajamas and a robe, thinking everyone had retired for the night. She climbed the rolling ladder to reach a top shelf. Thunder shook the house. The lights flickered and died. Sarah gasped, gripping the ladder in the pitch black. "Don't move!" A voice came from the darkness below. A beam of light cut through the room. Dominic was standing there, a flashlight in one hand, a gun in the other. He lowered the gun when he saw her. "Generator will kick in 10 seconds, he said. He walked over to the ladder and held it steady. "You shouldn't be wandering around at night." "Sarah, my guards might shoot first and ask questions later." "I needed a book," Sarah whispered, her heart hammering, not from fear of the guards, but from the proximity of him. In the flashlight's glow, the harsh lines of his face were softened. He looked tired. "Come down," he said. Sarah descended. When she reached the floor, she slipped. Dominic caught her. His arm went around her waist, pulling her flush against his chest to steady her. The contact was electric. Sarah felt the heat of his body through her thin silk robe. She looked up, breathless. Dominic didn't let go. He stared down at her, his eyes traveling from her lips to her eyes. For a moment, the boss was gone, and there was just a man who had been lonely for a very long time. "Sarah," he breathed, his voice rough. The lights flickered back on, blindingly bright. Dominic released her instantly, stepping back and clearing his throat. The mask was back in place. "Go to bed," he commanded, turning away. "And lock your door." Sarah fled to her room, her pulse racing. She knew she was in trouble. She was falling for the monster. But the next morning, the bubble burst. Sarah was in the kitchen making tea when Luca walked in, looking grim. "Ms. Jenkins, there's a visitor for you at the gate. Says he's your cousin." "I don't have a cousin in New York," Sarah said, frowning. "He has your brother's ID." Sarah ran to the security monitors. On the grainy screen, standing at the gate, was a man in a cheap suit. It wasn't her cousin. It was Agent Miller from the FBI, and he was holding Toby's wallet. Sarah felt bile rise in her throat. She looked at Luca. "Let him in." She met Miller in the driveway, out of earshot of the house bugs, or so she hoped. "Ms. Jenkins." Miller smiled, a shark's smile. "Nice place, a bit above your pay grade. What do you want? Where is Toby?" "Toby is fine, for now. He's enjoying his new private room at Mount Sinai. Very generous of Mr. Moretti." Miller stepped closer, his voice dropping. "But generosity comes with a price. We know Moretti is moving a shipment of unregistered tech through the docks on Friday. The Black Ledger. It contains the names of every corrupt judge and cop on his payroll." "I don't know anything about that," Sarah hissed. "You're going to find out," Miller said. "You're inside. You have access. We need you to find that ledger and take a picture of it." "I can't! He'll kill me!" "If you don't," Miller said, leaning in, "we will deport your mother. We will seize your assets. And we will pull the plug on your brother's kidney transplant. He has maybe 3 weeks without it." Sarah felt the world spin. "Friday. Sarah, get us the location of the ledger, or Toby dies." Miller walked away, getting into his sedan. Sarah stood in the driveway, the cold wind biting through her sweater. She looked back at the house. In the window, she saw Bella waving at her. She had to choose. The little girl who called her friend, or the brother who had protected her their whole lives. Betrayal was the only option, but in the house of Moretti, betrayal was a death sentence. The following 72 hours were a slow-motion car crash for Sarah Jenkins. Every time she looked at Bella, she felt sick. Every time Dominic looked at her with that new, terrifying softness in his eyes, she felt like a murderer. Agent Miller had been clear Friday. The shipment, the ledger. On Thursday afternoon, the atmosphere in the Moretti estate shifted. It wasn't the usual quiet tension. It was the buzzing, kinetic energy of a hive preparing for war. Men were coming and going, carrying crates. Luca was shouting orders into a satellite phone in the hallway. Sarah found Bella in the solarium, painting. The little girl was covering a canvas in angry streaks of red and black. "What are you painting?" Sarah signed, her hands trembling slightly. Bella looked up, her eyes wide and fearful. "Daddy is going away. The bad men are coming." Sarah's heart broke. She knelt beside her. "Daddy is strong. He will be okay. You promise?" Bella signed. Sarah couldn't sign yes. She couldn't lie to the girl in her own language. Instead, she hugged her, burying her face in Bella's curls to hide her tears. That evening, Dominic didn't come to dinner. The chair at the head of the table sat empty, a gaping maw in the room. Sarah ate alone, the food tasting like ash. She knew where he was. He was in his study, finalizing the shipment that Miller wanted to intercept. She had to do it. For Toby. She pictured her brother's face, pale and gaunt against the hospital pillow. "It's him or Dominic," she told herself. "A criminal or my brother." At 11 p.m. The house went quiet. Sarah crept out of her room. She wore socks to muffle her footsteps on the marble. The hallway was shadowed, the security cameras blinking their red, rhythmic eyes. Sarah knew the blind spots now. She had spent weeks watching the guards' rotations. She reached the heavy oak doors of the study. They were cracked open an inch. Inside, Dominic was pacing. He was on the phone, his back to the door. He had discarded his jacket, and his white dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms covered in ink. "I don't care about the risk." "Sal," Dominic growled into the phone. "The shipment moves at 2 a.m. Dock 4. If the feds are there, it means we have a rat. And if we have a rat, I burn the whole city down to find them." Sarah pressed herself against the wall, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Dock 4, 2:00 a.m. That was the info Miller needed. But she needed proof. Miller wanted the ledger. Dominic hung up the phone and slumped into his chair. He rubbed his temples, groaning low in his throat. He opened the bottom drawer of his desk, not the safe, but a drawer, and pulled out a thick, leather-bound book. He opened it, made a notation, and then, miraculously, he didn't put it back. He stood up and walked toward the adjoining private bathroom, leaving the book on the desk. This was it. Sarah slipped into the room. She moved like a phantom. She reached the desk. The leather book was heavy. She opened it. It wasn't a list of bribes. It was a list of families, widows and orphans. Maria Rossi. Rent paid through 2025. Giovanni Kids. Tuition. St. Jude's. Officer O'Malley. Medical bills for daughter's leukemia. Sarah froze. This wasn't a ledger of corruption. It was a ledger of debts paid to keep the neighborhood alive. Dominic wasn't just a mob boss. He was the bank, the safety net, the provider for hundreds of people. The system had failed, just like the system had failed Toby. She heard the water shut off in the bathroom. Panic spiked. She fumbled for her phone, snapped a picture of the page with the shipment details tucked inside the cover, and shoved the phone back into her pocket. She turned to run, but the bathroom door opened. Dominic stood there, wiping his face with a towel. He stopped dead. For a second, there was no sound but the ticking of the grandfather clock. Sarah. His voice was low, confused. I was looking for you, Sarah stammered, her mind racing. Bella. She had a nightmare. She was asking for you. Dominic's eyes narrowed. He looked at her, then at the desk, then back at her. The distance between them felt like a minefield. Bella never has nightmares, he said slowly. She sleeps like the dead. Sarah took a step back. She was signing help. I didn't know what to do. Dominic tossed the towel onto a chair and walked toward her. He didn't look angry. He looked disappointed. No, he looked intense. He closed the distance until he was towering over her. You're lying, he whispered. Sarah's breath hitched. Dominic. You're trembling, he observed, reaching out to touch her cheek. His hand was warm, rough, and gentle. You're terrified. I am, she admitted. It was the truest thing she'd said all night. Why are you in here? Sarah. He moved his hand from her cheek to her neck, his thumb resting on her pulse point. He could feel her heart racing. I wanted to see you, she whispered, the lie tasting sweet and desperate. Before you left tonight, I know something is happening. I was scared. Dominic stared into her eyes, searching for deceit, but what he found was fear and desire, and he mistook the fear of getting caught for the fear of losing him. Something in him snapped. The wall he had built around himself crumbled. You shouldn't be here, he groaned. You shouldn't care about a man like me. I can't help it, Sarah said, and suddenly she realized it wasn't a lie anymore. Dominic crashed his lips onto hers. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a claiming. It was desperate and hungry, tasting of whiskey and danger. Sarah clung to him, her hands bunching in his shirt. For a moment, she forgot Toby. She forgot Miller. She forgot the photo on her phone that would destroy this man. She just felt him. The power, the loneliness, the need. He pulled back, resting his forehead against hers, breathing heavily. Go to bed. Sarah, he rasped. Go, before I can't let you leave. Sarah fled. She ran back to her room, locked the door, and slid down to the floor. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Miller, time is up. Sarah. With shaking hands, she attached the photo and hit send. She sat in the dark and wept. She had just saved her brother, and she had just signed Dominic Moretti's death warrant. Friday morning broke with a deceptive calm. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. The ocean below the cliff sparkled like diamonds. But inside the Moretti estate, the silence was deafening. Dominic had left hours ago. The shipment was scheduled for tonight. Sarah went through the motions of the day like a zombie. She taught Bella geography. This is Italy, Sarah signed, pointing to the boot on the map, where your ancestors are from. Take me there, Bella signed, someday. Sarah smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. At noon, a courier arrived. A package for Sarah. Luca inspected it, scanned it, and then handed it to her. From the hospital, he grunted. Sarah took it to her room. Inside was a letter from Mount Sinai. Mr. Tobias Jenkins has been approved for immediate transplant surgery. A donor match has been found. Surgery is scheduled for Saturday morning. She dropped the letter. She had done it. Toby was going to live. But then she saw the second piece of paper in the envelope. A handwritten note. Payment received. Good girl. She felt like vomiting. She went to the bathroom and splashed cold water on her face. She looked at herself in the mirror. Traitor. Her reflection seemed to scream. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Dominic returned. He didn't look like a man about to walk into a trap. He looked peaceful. He found Sarah in the garden, cutting roses. Pack a bag, he said. Sarah dropped the shears. What? Pack a bag for you and Bella. Luca is taking you to the safe house in the Hamptons for the weekend. Why? Sarah asked. Panic rising. Did he know, was he sending her away to be killed? Because tonight is going to be loud, Dominic said, looking out at the ocean. And I don't want you or Bella near the blast zone. He turned to her. He looked tired, older than his 35 years. I'm getting out. Sarah. Sarah froze. What? The shipment tonight. It's the last one. I made a deal with the commission. I'm stepping down. I'm legitimizing the business. No more guns. No more drugs. Just construction and real estate. He took a step closer to her. Last night, you made me realize something. I don't want Bella growing up in a fortress, and I don't want you looking at me with fear. The ground seemed to open up beneath Sarah's feet. He was quitting. He was getting out. Tonight was supposed to be his exit, not just a job. And she had just sold him out to the FBI. Dominic, you can't go tonight, she blurted out. It's already in motion, he said gently. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a velvet box. I was going to wait until this weekend, but... He opened it. Inside was a platinum bracelet with a charm, a hand shape in ASL. I love you. I never thought I'd say those words, Dominic whispered. But you taught me how... Sarah couldn't breathe. The air was too thin. The guilt was a physical weight, crushing her lungs. She opened her mouth to confess, to tell him to stop the shipment, to tell him everything. Boom. The explosion didn't come from the docks. It came from the front gate. Sirens wailed. Not police sirens, raid sirens. Dominic's face changed instantly. The lover vanished. The Don returned. He grabbed his radio. Luca report. They're here. Boss FBI SWAT. They're breaching the gate. They have a tank. Dominic looked at Sarah, and in that split second, the realization hit him. He looked at the gate. Then, at the time, it was 5 p.m. The shipment wasn't until 2 a.m. They aren't here for the shipment, he muttered. They're here for the conspiracy charges. He looked at Sarah. His eyes were wide, the pupils blown. Only 3 people knew I was at the house right now. Me, Luca, and... He trailed off. He looked at the bracelet in his hand. Then he looked at Sarah's face. Guilt was written in every line of her features. Sarah, he asked. The word was a shattered plea. I had to, she sobbed, backing away. They have Toby. They were going to let him die. Dominic, I'm so sorry. The look on his face wasn't anger. It was something far worse. It was the look of a man watching his soul burn down. He didn't scream. He didn't strike her. He just closed the velvet box with a snap that sounded like a gunshot. Get Bella, he said, his voice dead. Dominic, get her. He roared, the sound echoing off the garden walls. Take her to the safe room in the basement. Now. Sarah ran. She found Bella in the kitchen, terrified by the noise. She grabbed the girl's hand. Run, she signed. They scrambled down the back stairs as the front doors were battered down. Flashbangs went off, shaking the foundation. Sarah dragged Bella into the panic room behind the wine cellar. She punched in the code Dominic had shown her weeks ago. The heavy steel door hissed shut, sealing them in. Inside the panic room, there was a bank of monitors. Sarah hugged Bella, rocking her. As they watched the screens, on the screen for the main hall, Sarah saw Dominic. He wasn't fighting. He was standing in the middle of the foyer, hands raised. Agent Miller walked in, surrounded by tactical gear. He was smiling. He walked up to Dominic and said something. Dominic didn't respond. Miller pistol-whipped him. Dominic fell to his knees, blood pouring from his temple. Sarah screamed, but the sound was trapped in the steel box. She watched as they cuffed him. She watched as they dragged him out. And just before they pushed him out the door, Dominic looked up. He looked right into the security camera. He knew she was watching. He raised his cuffed hands, and he signed one word: betrayal. Then the screen went black. Sarah sat on the floor of the panic room, holding the weeping daughter of the man she loved, the man she had just destroyed. She had saved her brother, but the price was her soul. The silence in the panic room was absolute. But for Sarah, it was the loudest sound she had ever heard. The weeks following Dominic's arrest were a grey haze of misery and bureaucracy. The media called it the fall of the king. Every news channel replayed the footage of Dominic Moretti being shoved into a federal vehicle, his face a mask of stone. They didn't see the sign he flashed at the camera, but Sarah did. It haunted her every waking moment. Betrayal. Sarah wasn't in prison, but she wasn't free. She and Bella had been moved to a penthouse in Manhattan, technically under protective custody. But Sarah knew it for what it was: a cage. Agent Miller visited daily, his shark-like smile widening with every visit. "You did the right thing, Sarah," Miller said, pouring himself a drink from the hotel minibar. "Toby is out of surgery. His body accepted the kidney. He's going to live a long, happy life. You're a hero." "I'm a rat," Sarah whispered, staring out at the rain-slicked city. "You're a survivor," Miller corrected. "Now, about the ledger. The real one. We raided the estate, tore up the floorboards. We found nothing but cash and guns. Where did he keep the insurance files, the ones with the dirt on the judges?" "I don't know," Sarah said dully. "I told you, I only saw the book on his desk." Miller's face hardened. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into her bruised skin. "Don't play games with me, teacher. Sal Russo is getting impatient. If we don't find that leverage, the power vacuum Dominic left behind will be filled by blood. And I can't guarantee your brother's safety if the Russos decide to pay him a visit at the hospital." Sarah froze. Sal Russo. It clicked. The FBI wasn't looking for the ledger to prosecute corrupt judges. Miller was working for the Russo family. They wanted the ledger so they could blackmail the city's officials just like Dominic had. She hadn't saved the city. She had just handed the keys to a different, crueler warlord. She pulled her arm away. "I need to see him. Moretti. He's in solitary. No visitors. If you want that ledger." Sarah lied, her voice steady for the first time in days. "I need to ask him. He trusts me. Or, he did. I can get him to talk." Miller studied her, looking for the lie. He saw only desperation, which he mistook for submission. "Fine," Miller sneered. 1 hour. Federal Detention Center. But we listen to every word. One slip-up, and I pull the plug on Toby's recovery. The Federal Detention Center in Brooklyn was a fortress of concrete and misery. Sarah was led through endless checkpoints until she reached the high-security visitation room. It was a cold, sterile box divided by a thick sheet of bulletproof glass. Dominic was brought in shackles. He wore an orange jumpsuit that clashed violently with his dark complexion. He looked thinner, his cheekbones sharper, circles under his eyes. He sat down, picked up the phone, and just stared at her. His eyes were dead. No anger, no love, just a void. Sarah picked up her receiver. Her hand shook. "Dominic," she choked out. "You have 5 minutes," he said, his voice scratching like sandpaper. "Why are you here to check if I'm broken?" "I'm here because—" Sarah glanced at the guard standing behind Dominic and the 2 agents standing behind her. The cameras were recording everything. The phones were tapped. She couldn't speak freely. She took a deep breath. She placed her hand on the glass. Dominic looked at her hand. Then he looked at her eyes. Sarah began to sign. She kept the phone to her ear, pretending to speak nonsense. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry," she said aloud. "Miller is dirty." Her hand signed rapidly against the glass. "He works for Rousseau. They want the black ledger." Dominic's eyes widened a fraction. He didn't react physically, but the intelligence flared back to life behind his gaze. He shifted, blocking the guard's view of his hands with his broad shoulders. "Apologies don't change the past." "Sarah," Dominic said into the phone, his voice cold. "Is Bella safe?" He signed, his movements minute, kept low near the counter. "I know," Sarah sobbed, tears streaming down her face, real tears. "I just miss you. She is with me. Miller threatened Toby. I had no choice. But I will fix this. Tell me where the book is." Dominic stared at her. He was calculating. He had spent his life reading people, finding their breaking points. He saw the terror in Sarah. Yes, but he also saw a fire that hadn't been there before. She wasn't just a teacher anymore. She was a soldier. "You should go." "Sarah." "Forget about me," Dominic said. "The book is gone." He signed. "It is not a book. It is a person." Sarah frowned, confused. Dominic leaned forward, his breath fogging the glass. "Goodbye, Sarah." "Bella," he signed. "The code is in her lullaby. The one she hums. Listen to the notes. Numbers." The guard stepped forward. "Time's up." Dominic stood. As he was led away, he didn't look back, but he left his hand trailing behind his back for a split second. He signed one last shape. Trust. Sarah walked out of the prison with her heart pounding in her throat. She had the key. The most dangerous information in New York City wasn't in a safe deposit box. It was hidden in the mind of an 8-year-old girl who hadn't spoken in 2 years. And Sarah was the only one who knew the language. Sarah returned to the penthouse with a clarity she had never felt before. The fear was gone, burned away by a cold, hard resolve. She found Bella in the bedroom, drawing on the window condensation. "Hey, sweetie," Sarah said softly. She sat on the bed. "Do you remember the song Daddy used to hum to you? The one about the moon?" Bella nodded. She began to hum. It was a simple, repetitive melody. Sarah listened. She grabbed a pen and paper. She wasn't a musician, but she recognized patterns. Dominic was a math genius. The hum wasn't just a melody, it was a sequence. She counted the beats. 3, 1, 4, 7. It was a bank account number and a routing number. Cayman Islands. Sarah's fingers flew across the iPad Dominic had given her, the one Miller hadn't confiscated because it looked like a child's toy. She accessed the secure server Dominic had shown her once, purely by accident, during a lesson on cybersecurity. She punched in the numbers. The screen flashed green. Files accessed the Russo Syndicate, RACO predicates. It wasn't Dominic's crimes. It was Sal Russo's crimes. Dominic had been gathering evidence on his rival for years, waiting for the kill shot. This was the leverage. Sarah looked at the files. There were photos of Agent Miller taking bribes. There were recordings of Sal Russo ordering hits on judges. It was enough to bury them all. But Sarah didn't send it to the FBI. The FBI was compromised. She sent it to the New York Times and the Washington Post and every major news outlet in the country. She hit send all just as the door to the penthouse crashed open. Agent Miller stormed in, gun drawn. You went to see him. What did he tell you? Sarah stood up, placing herself between Miller and Bella. She held up the iPad. He told me everything, Sarah said calmly. And now, the whole world knows. Miller's phone began to buzz, then vibrate, then ring. It didn't stop. He looked at his screen. It was his supervisor, then the commissioner. His face went pale. What did you do? I taught a lesson, Sarah said, her voice ringing with the steel of the Moretti family. Lesson 1. Never underestimate the quiet ones. Sirens wailed outside. Real police this time. Internal affairs. The press. Miller lowered his gun. Defeated. He knew it was over. 6 months later. The courtroom was standing room only, packed with reporters, federal observers, and men in suits who had spent their lives orbiting power without ever touching it. For weeks, the trial of Salvatore Russo and former Agent Miller had dominated every headline: wiretaps, bribes, hidden accounts, and a web of corruption so deep it had shaken the city's faith in its own institutions. But today wasn't about them. Today was about Dominic Moretti. Sarah stood near the back, close to the exit, where the air felt thinner and escape was possible. She kept her hands clasped tightly in front of her, grounding herself. 6 months ago, she hadn't known if she'd ever set foot in a courtroom again without shaking apart. Now, she was steady, tired but steady. With Miller exposed and arrested, the case against Dominic had collapsed in on itself. The evidence he'd planted, fabricated financial trails. Doctored recordings had been thrown out one by one. Sarah's own testimony, once the cornerstone of the prosecution, had been formally recanted under oath. Its coercion laid bare for the record. The truth had finally been louder than the lies. The judge adjusted his glasses. The room fell silent. Case dismissed, he said, bringing the gavel down. The defendant is free to go. For half a second. No one moved. Then the courtroom erupted voices, flashes, chairs scraping back. Lawyers shook hands. Cameras surged forward. Somewhere, a woman sobbed. Sarah didn't join the chaos. She stayed where she was, watching. Dominic rose from his seat and walked through the open gate. He wore a dark suit, tailored and immaculate, like armor reclaimed. He hugged Luca, clasped hands with his attorney, nodded once to a man Sarah didn't recognize. He looked every inch the king the world believed him to be. Then he turned. His gaze cut through the room, bypassing the press, the shouting, the spectacle. He was looking for her. Sarah's breath caught. Instinct took over. She turned toward the exit, heart pounding. She had done what she came to do. He was free. Bella was safe. Toby was healthy and back in college. The ledger, in her mind, was balanced. She didn't deserve anything more. Sarah. The sound of his voice carried across the lobby, deep and unignorable. She froze. He was already moving, pushing through the crowd without apology, cameras flashing uselessly at his back. When he reached her, he caught her arm and spun her around. His hands were warm, solid, real. He looked furious. He looked relieved. He looked like a man who had stared into the abyss and survived it. "You were leaving," he demanded. Her voice wavered. She swallowed. "I fixed it. You're free. My debt is paid." "Your debt?" He let out a short, incredulous laugh. "You think this was a transaction?" His eyes searched her face, fierce and unguarded. "You saved my life. You saved my daughter. You took down the Russo family with an iPad and a lullaby," before she could respond. He stepped closer and cupped her face in his hands. The noise around them seemed to fall away. "You are the only person on this earth who sees me," he said quietly. "Not the money, not the reputation. Me." Tears burned behind her eyes. "I almost got you killed. And then you walked into the fire to bring me back," he replied, his forehead resting against hers. "That's not betrayal. That's loyalty. That's family." He kissed her then, right there in the middle of the federal courthouse. It wasn't rushed or hidden. It was a promise of a future claimed, of a choice made without regret. When they broke apart, breathless, Sarah felt a small tug at her jacket. She looked down. Bella stood there, solemn and radiant, holding a bouquet of flowers she had clearly stolen from a courtroom display. She looked up at Sarah with wide, determined eyes. For a moment, Sarah expected her hands to rise, ready to sign. Instead, Bella took a deep breath. Her voice was rusty, small, unused, but it cut straight through Sarah's heart. "Mum." The word shattered her. Sarah dropped to her knees, tears spilling freely as Dominic joined them, wrapping his arms around both of them, around his family. The King of New York, the silent girl who had found her voice, and the teacher who had given them one. They walked out together, ignoring the reporters and the shouted questions. At the car, Dominic opened the door for Sarah. She smiled at him and raised her hands. "Where are we going?" she signed. His answering smile was rare and genuine, transforming his whole face. His hands moved smoothly, confidently. Home. And that is the story of Sarah and Dominic. It wasn't a fairy tale, and it certainly wasn't clean. It was messy, dangerous, and built on the kind of love that only grows in the dark. But in the end, they found a language that was all their own, a language where betrayal could turn into trust, and where silence was louder than any gunshot. Whatever you do, don't let the world silence you. Sometimes, the quietest people have the loudest hearts. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, or if Bella's first word made you tear up, please do me a huge favor. Hit that like button right now. It helps the channel so much. And if you want more stories about forbidden love, high-stakes drama, and mafia romance, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell. I'll see you in the next story. Thanks for listening.